Well, it's my great pleasure today to be here with Stefan Vilsmeier from Brainlab. And we're going to talk to him about his wonderful experiences. He's the founder and president of Brainlab, and he's been a true innovator and a partner for both neurosurgery and neurosurgical patients. And today we're going to explore that interaction. We, as part of Organized Neurosurgery, are really committed to providing innovative but high quality and patient safety care. And he's been a real partner in that, and that's why we are interviewing him today. So welcome. It's our pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off. Your company goes way back, and you were quite young when it all started. Talk to us a little bit about what those early motivations were in starting your company and what you wanted to achieve.
Well, starting a company focusing on brain surgery isn't what most people decide to do as their destiny in life. So for me, it all started with my first computer, which was a Commodore 64 that I got at the age of 15. And if you don't start at 7 or 8 years, you're never going to be very good at software. And so I was probably the worst software engineer to work at Brainlab, but I knew whom to hire. And with this computer, I wrote a book on 3D software because I had vector geometry at school in that year. And I wanted to basically try to develop something tangible. And I wrote a book on 3D software, and that when I was 16, and that sold 50,000 copies in the first year, which was a bestseller on the German computer book market. And in 1987, the year where I graduated from high school, that book resulted in my being invited by the University of Vienna to join them for their neurosurgery department for some special project. And they had read the book and thought that I could help them with some specific project. And through this, I had the first contact with images from computer tomography and magnetic resonance tomography. And when I saw the high precision of those images, I couldn't believe that those images ended up in a light box in the corner of the room. And surgeons started working manually with what they had memorized from those images. And so for me, it was clear that software was the missing link. And despite the fact that I had started studying computer science at the Technical University of Munich, I dropped out of college after 20 days. And by burning the bridges to a reasonable life and career, I had no other chance but to succeed with what I started.
You said to me before that one of your strong motivations in developing the kind of software that you did was that stereotactic radiosurgery, when you entered into the market, was really a luxury treatment, that you sought to democratize that treatment because you saw some components of how we were delivering stereotactic radiosurgery, which limited the number of patients, limited the number of universities, but also limited the safety and quality. First, let's go to the concept of it being a luxury treatment and very limited. Tell us how you thought about that and what the things you wanted to address to change that.
Well, I felt that in general, software in neurosurgery was a very bizarre idea. So neurosurgeons that needed software weren't good neurosurgeons. So fortunately for Brainlab, things have changed. However, in trying to find a first application for where software could be used, I came across a therapy called radiosurgery, and this was basically during a visit to Boston, and I basically saw some university homegrown systems that try to modify a linear accelerator to provide very high precision treatments. And basically, I was just really fascinated by that concept, and I don't really know a lot of people that basically started radiosurgery and ever left the field, because it's really an extremely impressive and intriguing concept. And by looking around, I found that there was probably around the world maybe 1 or 2 dozen basically universities that had all their homegrown systems, and some software they developed on their own, some hardware, and some components that they manufactured in their basement, and there was really just no commercial solution. And the only other system that was available was basically, the so-called, gamma knife, which at that time was basically of, very limited global, availability. And however, linear accelerators were basically broadly, available and accessible. And so really my motivation was to really provide a greater access to that treatment. But it became clear that that is only possible by standardizing basically the treatment. And this is, of course, difficult because every university has very strong feelings about their own specific, workflow. But this was finally something we accomplished. And today there's probably more brain treatments in radiosurgery done with our technology than with all other concepts together.
So it seems like you did successfully democratize the process. You made it available to many more people. I think along the way, you made a couch-mounted system that was also a lot more flexible and could be used, full-time or part-time. You also mentioned to me in one of our previous conversations that you knew that because you were making it a little bit easier, that you had to really assure the accuracy and the precision and the reproducibility of it. Can you talk to me about how that came into play and how you developed your system at the start and how that's continued?
Okay, so with the very early systems, there were a couple of very crude methods. Some people would bolt a patient into a chair and rotate the entire chair because they felt that it wasn't accurate enough to move the linear accelerator. Some other people basically had, used a floor system that they somehow bolted onto the floor to which they secured the patient. However, if they pressed the wrong button and the gantry would somehow, just turn into this base mount, they would somehow, beheading the patient. So basically, all those treatments were, very slow, very carefully done for just a handful of patients. And we realized that all the concepts were basically from adopting a stereotactic head frame that was used for functional neurosurgery, such as in surgery using acquiring biopsies or treating Parkinson and other diseases, and that was just adopted for and people used what was available to somehow secure the patient. And we essentially went back to the drawing board because we had nothing and basically had to come up with our own hardware solution. So our first approach was, let's just supply the software and basically use somebody else's hardware. However, in order to contain Brainlab, all the other players basically said, no, we're not going to sell our hardware if Brainlab is in the picture. So we were more or less forced to reimagine what such a system could look like. And so more or less we said, okay, we don't want to bolt it to the floor because that is for us, too complex to even orchestrate and organize it around the world. So we wanted something that you can just put on the couch and remove. And then, of course, it was a lot more flexible. So basically, how do you really make sure that even during the treatment, you always perfectly hit the target? And we also felt that all the systems had some mechanical sliders that needed to be adjusted. But if they had a typo or number mismatch, if they confused, I don't know, say 32 with 23, then there was probably no way of how that could be easily be caught. And so for that reason, we felt that we want to have a more direct approach in how that could be done, and came up with the idea of printing the plan on a plastic sheet that was mounted on a plastic box that was put on the head of the patient. So where in the past you had achieved an accuracy by almost like 7 steps, we basically replaced that through 3 steps, which was inherently a lot safer and more automated. And that by itself provided radiosurgery to a much larger number of patients. And I think that was the first point in which radiosurgery really started to move out of basically the university environment to basically some of the larger private institutions. And basically, we also really felt that that was a therapy with the right tools and with the right training could be, safely done and could be accessible to a much larger number of patients.
So it seems to me like your first step was realizing that this was something that was really necessary for many more people than were getting it. You wanted to simplify the system, but in doing that, you made sure that there were simplified but very effective, redundant checks and balances on the mechanical aspect through some really very innovative software. So in two ways, you made it more available, but also more safe. But I think you then took it a step further. You took the education of the stereotactic radiosurgery community another step further, and you started your Novalis Community and the Novalis Certification. Let's start off with the Novalis Community and your efforts to do the training and to create a training and learning environment. Talk to me about how that came about and what your goals were for the Novalis Community.
Okay, so very early on in the company history, when I installed, one of the first of our systems in China in 1994, the neurosurgeon that was supposed to use our system was just 23 years old and finished medical school just 2 weeks before I got there. So basically, he wasn't very experienced. And so I ended up putting on the head ring and screwing that, bolting that to the head of the patient, where I would have gone to jail in most countries. But basically, our distributor made it clear that without the proper, without the first patient treatment, there was not going to be any transportation back to the airport. So it's amazing what you can do if you have to. But I think that was for me a very deep personal experience, also having direct patient contact, etc. And I think that really made it clear, as a really small company with just a handful of people, that we needed to invest in training and education, equally. And so we basically put together our best users, and in many iterations and think tank meetings, tried to get them to agree to standardizing the workflow. So we had still some variability, and every site was doing it a bit different, but that also made it difficult to compare some of the clinical results. And in order to basically move that concept further, we need to have better publications, better clinical studies, and basically a consistent training. And so that's what we did when we formed the Novalis Circle. So we looked for like-minded physicians, and put together a first program, and essentially brought them together off-site, away from their clinical setup, and basically really worked on the clinical workflows, and that's what we taught. So I think it was really important that every new site basically would go and take a training course at one of the experienced Novalis systems. And then afterwards, when they did their first treatments, and also that teacher would very frequently come and travel to that new site to basically supervise the first few patient treatments. And that could also be used for the launch event, because it was also important to get the buy-in of basically a lot of the referring physicians and clinical oncologists, etc. Because a lot of times the problem was that the standard of care for brain mets is just using whole brain radiation, which of course has a lot of times difficult consequences for memory, etc. of patients. And so a targeted treatment, of course, seems a lot better. And so so we basically have then achieved a very standardized workflow, and taught it to the local referring physicians in the launch event. And so the result very early was that basically those sites that invested in a Novalis, and that also came along with a certain technical configuration, also buying a new machine that was calibrated to a higher accuracy, etc., that basically those sites also made a statement about their commitment to become a center of excellence and drive that treatment forward. So very interesting. Everybody that went through that program had started treating way over 100 patients, sometimes even 400 or 500 patients. And everybody not going through basically such a standardized structured training program typically treated less than 50 cases. So it really had to do with becoming proficient, getting a level of confidence, building referral network, but also developing some routine that allowed those sites to exercise radiosurgery safely.
And you know, in all fairness, you know, the Novalis Circle is not unique. There are other technologies in neurosurgery and otherwise where they use the same kind of user groups. But I can tell you that I both participated before I launched my program, but then was able to continue to participate and help train other programs. And one of the things that I can attest to is that while Brainlab sponsored those programs and made sure that they were really high quality, they also took a back seat and made sure that what drove the agenda were the physicians and the physicists and the research in the science, and that it was not it was sponsored by Brainlab, but we were free to develop the program so that they really met the needs of the centers. And I really appreciated that. Again, I had the honor of helping to organize one of those programs, and in doing so was really given the freedom to choose the best speakers and to organize the topics, not for what you and your team wanted, but for what we knew where it was best for the patients and the centers.
And so, I think we also in this initial meetings incorporate people that were using other technologies. So it was also technology open, and so that really allowed also people to compare notes and you know, have a much more open discussion than you normally would have at the big congresses. And I think that's something that we have really maintained you know, all the way till to today, to just really, you know, be completely open for also other technologies and you know, other participants, so that there is just no requirement to adhere to a certain level of technology. You know, however, we just basically, when we do a training course, we just focus on training a particular type of technology.
So, I mean, you know, we could talk forever. There's at least 2 or 3 more things I want to make sure that we cover before we wrap up today. The one is that, you know, I've said that I really feel that you have exemplified how you can work with neurosurgeons and work with physicians to improve your product, to improve patient safety, but with there not being that conflict of interest that a lot of people discuss. The next step that I see in the evolution of what you did was you started an independent Novalis certification program to assess the quality of radiosurgery programs, both Brainlab and otherwise, to ensure that those centers had the right processes in place so that patient safety and quality improvement was at the forefront of those centers. So could you again talk about the conception of the Novalis certification and how you've launched it but been able to maintain it without the conflict of interest of your company?
Yeah. So, you know, first of all, there was a lot of, you know, technology innovation that moved really the access to radiosurgery for further, including shaping the beam, including frameless radiosurgery, getting rid of the head frame, etc. And all of those made basically the technology much more accessible and resulting in about 1,000 sites around the world, you know, providing that treatment. And we then looked at how can we take it even a step further, because at institutions you have sometimes change of personnel, you have sometimes maybe, you know, challenges in you know, unclear responsibilities, etc., and commissioning steps. And so we felt that we really wanted to establish the highest possible standard. And so Brainlab basically obviously couldn't do that because it shouldn't be a company standard. So we just funded basically the Novalis Circle, basically meeting and coming up with their own definition of what defines a good site and what are the steps and the checkpoints that have to be met. And so we have actually, you know, just as I said, taking a back seat of that, because we believe that we benefit from basically better patient care and a better reputation of the technology. And also I felt that we wanted to have that you know, technology open, so it's not just for the systems that we installed, but also, you know, every one of the competitive systems. And so this involved an audit of existing patients that have been treated, of the documentation, of the internal processes, and basically, and that was partially done virtually by uploading documents, but also going on sites and on site and interviewing, the team. And everybody that went through the process basically felt that not only was it basically somebody came in to police, what they were doing, but everybody felt that they benefited in terms of the quality of the program by having a good mental sparings partner that would more or less raise the right questions and more or less allowed them to reflect about some of the internal steps that they had implemented. And so I think that regardless of how good the site already was, everybody felt that they have further benefited from that certification program. And so therefore, I think that has also been a big success. It's slow side by side. It's a lot of effort by the auditors, but I think it's very worthwhile and basically provides a lot of additional safety for the patients that are treated.
And again, while I've never been an auditor, I have been part of that team. And what you said is very true, that a lot of the times the auditors went to the sites and identified not glaring errors or glaring problems with patient safety or quality improvement, but they were able to provide some resources to help each of the sites further enhance their processes and make sure that the processes were what I would call redundant. So it wasn't dependent on Dr. A or Nurse B or Physicist C, that the processes were in place that all of the individuals, if they left, they didn't take the entire patient safety or the protocols with them. And so the feedback that we got from, most of the sites that participated was that they always felt that they were better after their audit. And like all these things, the audits are time limited, so they can't just do it once and pretend, put all these pieces of paper together, that it was really a living, breathing thing that the sites had to maintain. And up till that time, the mechanism for ensuring that if you got radiosurgery as a patient, that you were at a site that was qualified was fairly limited. So I think that this has provided a tremendous resource to our patients, but also to the programs to have the certification in process. Let's jump to a related but slightly different topic. You, Brainlab, and you as an individual have been very supportive of the development of registries, and registries are something that we in the U.S. are, feel are an organized neurosurgery field is really going to help us bring data together to enhance patient care. Tell us how the whole thing came about, that you were one of the prime supporters of the registries process for stereotactic radiosurgery.
Well, when we were approached by the FAANS and ASTRO, we about 10 years ago, we for funding, we basically started a discussion about what are in general even the technical challenges, and we realized that there was more a technical than a funding problem, even because the quality of data that is being typically captured in registries is not very good. Let me give an example. So the most frequent type of registries is, for example, for knees and hips, after knee and hip surgery, replacement surgery, and there is 42 knee and hip registries worldwide. They typically, have maybe 1 or 2 dozen data fields that you put in an Excel spreadsheet and you upload that, and then somebody aggregates the data, and then 10 years later, they basically trying to correlate the time a hip implant would last with maybe some surgical parameters. And that's a very crude and error-prone process. And however, if you bring that to radiosurgery, we have many more parameters, then that is a huge challenge to really ensure data integrity and data quality. And in all prior projects in radiation oncology, basically all failed by not getting enough patients and not getting enough good data. So that's when we basically said, okay, we need to again find a technology solution that takes the already digital radiation plan, and we can extract out of the plan about 350 parameters, but we also have a software that normalizes the patient anatomy. So if you really want to know how much dose would the brainstem get, then it depends on who outlined the brainstem. So for that reason, we have an automatic software in the background that determines the brainstem, and based on that determination has a objective way of measuring how much dose the brainstem would get. And now all of a sudden you have a completely different depth of data that than what you used to have in the past. And in radiosurgery, there's about 60 years of research and about for brain metastasis, for example, about 3,000 papers that have been published. But I really believe that a registry can take that all to the next level. And with cancer turning more and more into a chronic disease and patients living longer, I think it becomes, and getting a combination of more and more complex treatments, it's important to increasingly personalize each treatment. And for that, you need to capture information in a much more detailed way, rather than was the patient treated with radiation, what was the dose, and were the complications small, medium, large. That's not good enough. And so we created an automatic system that will be the foundation for the cancer treatment of the future. So basically, the patients that are suffering from cancer today will basically help to optimize the treatment dose and the treatment parameters for their children and grandchildren. And so for that reason, capturing the data, sharing the data, and doing that in a patient-centric and safe and private way is extremely important. And I think Brainlab benefits from the fact that we are a maybe European company where basically maybe the public discussion about data privacy and etc. is basically a lot more rigid, and so therefore we really look at having an infrastructure that is really leading in that dimension, and that basically every patient being treated with radiosurgery doesn't want to be the first patient, but they want to just benefit from the cumulative experience from thousands and millions of patients that have been treated before, and get the perfect treatment for their specific configuration of disease. And that's what we'll be able to get through registries.
I think it's great because the registries really do take out the unique thing of each site, which maybe have a little bit different. It brings all that information together. It gives us a better understanding. It standardizes the things that need to be standardized, doesn't standardize the things we don't need to. So we really do get that patient-centric treatment in the end. And as you said, it's standardized for all the things that need to be, but we can still then extract it so that each patient gets their best treatment. So, I had sort of forgotten how much of a role you played, not just in funding it, in supporting it, because these registries are expensive to establish and to maintain. And so you've been very generous at that, but you've also, once again, taken technology and applied it to the study of what you're doing so that all the data that's coming in is enriched and enhanced and gives us better answers. So, I said at the beginning, and I really believe it, that everybody that starts a company obviously wants to succeed and wants to make money, and wants to, maybe they want to make a good product. Some people care more about the money. I know you care about both aspects of things, but you've really been able to spend a lot of, and we're just talking about stereotactic radiosurgery now and not some of the other things that Brainlab does, but that's what I know best about your products, or what I wanted to focus on today. But you've taken something, you've made it more available to people around the world. You've ensured that with that expansion, you did everything you can to ensure that the patients are getting high quality, but then you've helped to bring the whole community of radiosurgery together with registries and certifications. I know that you have a few more tricks up your sleeve that you're planning to even further enhance the quality of care for cancer patients. And I know that you've talked to me, and maybe you could just take a couple minutes to talk about things like structured radiology and enhancements to the electronic medical record system so that cancer care and other types of care can be understood better by all the parties. Can you just tell us what some of the toys that you're playing with in your attic?
Okay, so when we looked at extracting data from those radiotherapy plans, we felt, okay, great, now we have really consistent data, but we realized that the breakdown very often was that the diagnosis was slightly off. And basically, if the diagnosis is off and basically, the decision, did the tumor grow or shrink, is maybe not completely correct, then also the treatments are wrong, and, of course, then they cannot be very effective. And the problem is when you have a radiologist dictate a report, then it's just text, and basically if two different radiologists would basically review the same patient's data, you can't even tell if they have seen the same thing. So basically we acquired a company called Mint Medical that came up with a structured radiology report that basically has a guideline-based process that you click through, and on the other screen you see basically the images, and when you measure the tumor, etc., you always have a link between the images and your radiological conclusion. And so this is highly standardized and structured. So if two people would do a reading, you can actually electronically compare if they have seen the same thing. And especially with cancer becoming more and more a chronic disease, if you're managing patients over time, then every time you do a follow-up, you want to have the best objective way of comparing what has changed to the prior data. And so for that, I think a very structured approach is extremely important. And in the background, other than the visible part of the tumor, we also run about 50 radiomics in the background where we measure other density, thresholds, etc., to quantify the change, so that basically when we later on want to correlate outcomes with then the images, and that is quite well possible. And that, in my opinion, is really just a major step forward. So we're working with a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are using that technology for clinical trials, but I think it should not just be used for clinical trials, but for every patient, and every patient should benefit from basically a more accurate and more systematic analysis of their data. And then, of course, you also need to incorporate patient-reported outcome measures. So I think that sending the patients a text message or email to see how they're doing 6 months, 1 year, etc. later, I think it's also important to incorporate, and that all needs to be correlated. And so therefore, bringing all that together in a comprehensive system, I think, is really quite crucial. And in addition to the radiotherapy data, we need to really get the data from clinical oncology, surgical oncology, and radiation oncology all together in the same data ecosystem, so that we can provide better care for patients with cancer.
Yeah, and once again, you're putting the patient at the center, and you're providing the tools so that we can really understand what effect our treatments are having biologically, but also emotionally and psychologically, and all of these are really important elements. And and I can say, as you and I have talked about, that the electronic medical records are designed to be administrative systems, and they're designed not by the people who are using them. And when I encounter a patient in my practice that's been treated for cancer, to try to put all the different elements together in some kind of flow, it's interspersed with, perhaps their treatment for a little, skin thing that's unrelated, and maybe they had a bladder infection or various and sundry other things, and all of the notes are all interspersed, and maybe they went to see their cardiologist for something unrelated. And so the fact that you're working on a way to have a kind of parallel system working within the electronic medical system that brings, all facets of a cancer care patients together, so that you can see the flow. When did they have their last imaging? When did they have their last complication? I know one of the things I struggle with as a surgeon is, how do I time it related to their chemotherapy, or restart radiation after we've done a surgery? And your vision of how you can create these interrelated systems will be able to allow us all to work in our own silos, but allow those silos to interact much more effectively. I don't doubt that this will be important for the multiplicity of cardiology services or medical services, where different specialists are sort of approaching a patient. all the different aspects of diabetes, the eye aspects, the kidney aspects, or whatever, if you could put all the diabetic care together in a package. And so it's great to know that we've got people like you working together with physicians. You know, you're in a commercial enterprise and we're in the healthcare world, but we are still a team because we want to do the best for our patients. Well, we've taken a lot of your time today. I'm sure there are a lot of other questions we could cover, and I'd love to come back and talk to you at another setting about some of the other work that you've done in collaboration with neurosurgery. But I do want to, you know, state again that I think that this is a great example of how industry can work together with physicians in a way where there's not a conflict of interest. And what we're doing is we're supporting each other in the efforts for patient safety and quality improvement and moving all of healthcare forward together. Stefan, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make for us?
No, I can only agree that it's typically important that a clinical paper will not cure cancer. So it's really a critical component that clinical research, fundamental research, and industry research are all working together to provide basically better care for all patients with cancer. And I think that there's never been a better time being diagnosed with cancer than right now. And so I think that there's just great discoveries, and better data will drive even greater discoveries. And so I look forward to working with you and other clinicians on this exciting journey.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.